Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to check out our sixth and final selection of songs for this 2-week theme of two-parters, checking out a part 1 and a part 2 of a song, usually sharing the same name. Y'all know how that works. Today we're going to be looking at Flotation Toy Warnings Fire Engine on Fire, part 1 and 2. They both come off of the Bluffer's Guide to the Flight Deck album, which came out in 2004. So, this is right in the middle of the album too. Interesting. I hadn't really picked up on that, but most of the stuff that we've checked out this week has either been to start an album, end an album, or in the case of Dream Theater, to do both, where part 1 begins it and part 2 ends it. Although we did have one cross-album idea where part 1 and 2 were on two different tracks, or two different albums. Anyways, let's dive into this, see what's going on with part 1, and we'll kind of gauge if we should move directly into part 2 or discuss it as the song is over.
You're recording.
Very interesting. This is very southern, big country here. A little bit, maybe pop country or bordering on broke country with the production of it all. But then we have this electronic side coming in that's very unexpected. My gut's telling me, though, that this is an electronic group that happens to be utilizing a country vibe with that guitar for this track. And it's not the other way around, where they're a country group utilizing electronic sounds.
It's not always easy to know when to
Well,
stop. The biggest pick of all is love.
you know, that vocalist fits right in too, though, so...
Bad dog. If you want, be my true hug. If you want.
Very nice layering. We have a bass guitar, center panned. It's giving us our low end. We have some midtones over here to balance out the vocals.
Absence makes the heart grow stronger, that's what they say. But how can I miss you?
I'm sorry, this is very bizarre. I'm still trying to get a grasp on this.
Be my bad dog. If you want, be my true heart. If you want. I lose my train of thought.
So a really strong conclusion to the section, but the song keeps going. Oh, this little toy piano synth sound is playing the same thing that we heard it play earlier in the song too, so I wonder just how new this next part is going to be. So we have the triplets against the quarter notes on the toy piano organ sounds. Is there a toy organ? I don't think so. Yeah, some syncopation being brought in with some of these ornamental ideas. It's interesting how it started off rhythmically layering, but now it's getting to a point of harmonic layer. Well, more rhythms are coming in too, so... It's very dreamlike, though, of wanting. No, of longing for something. I love it. It is all over the place. Like, this whole section is rooted in 40s, 50s? Oh, the 50s was actually where the instrument strike was. That's where we got all of our a cappella groups. So yeah, probably 40s then, pop music. But like mixed with so many modern influences. It's almost like somebody took a sample from an older track and then added more stuff to it, making a modern remaster of it of sorts. I'm sure all of this is original and the production is just that authentic to the era they're replicating. But I mean, that just speaks to the producer's abilities then. I don't know if this goes into the next track, but we got a harsh stop here. We got to talk about this. This is bonkers. Alright, so the song exists in two parts. Very cleanly split, pretty much right down the middle. It's just shy of 7 minutes long, and it was like the 3.5 minute mark when we shifted ideas. So we have two main parts here. The first part is electro country in a way that I don't think that term properly describes. To me, electro country would be like country music made entirely with electronic timbres, but that's not what goes on here. This is sort of a mashup of electronic music and country music. We have a bluesier guitar going on with a bit of a... I don't know how to describe it. Like, I wanted to call it the country twang. Although country is based off of blues, there's also a very big differentiation of country guitar work versus blues guitar work. And I actually don't know what separates them. I gotta look into that. But yeah, so we have that. We have a harmonica. We have whistling in here. These are all like staples of classic country music. But there's also digitized voices in here, something bordering on speak and spell, but if someone also had their hand on a pitch shifter to go along with it, where the pitch shifting wasn't balanced out by time. You see something really interesting. Auto-tune, melodyne, pitch correction. We correct pitch by speeding up or slowing down sound waves. When you slow them down, they get lower. When you speed them up, they get faster. But the thing is that that also means you're going to play around with the temporal element. So what programs like Autotune does is both manipulate the time and the pitch. If it's a little flat, it'll speed it up so that the pitch is corrected, and then stretch the file itself out so that we can get the time corrected again. That's what was really important about it. We've had pitch modulation for years before something like Autotune really became popular, but it was the combination of the software to know how to manipulate both elements, pitch and time. Um, where was I going with all this? Oh yeah, we have the this is like a massive little tangent here. Massive little, fantastic. We had pitch modulation here, but we stretched it out alongside the dips. Higher tones became faster, lower tones became slower. It sounded like old school pitch correction or pitch modulation, which is probably the more accurate term for what's going on here. We have all sorts of digital sounds coming in here too. Synthesizers, synth pads, what sounds to me like bordering on MIDI strings. There's a lot of non-acoustic elements going along with what sounds to me as if an acoustic harmonica and guitar, acoustic guitar. But we also have the vocals that eventually come in this section too, and they are 100% that stereotypical, deep, gravelly, world-worn male voice of the 50s style of country music, that classic country vibe. Not any of the pop country that we started seeing in the 90s and especially, past 2000s, where they sort of put on a country mask with the heavy uh, uh, twang and drawl, that southern drawl you can get. And when you start singing them songs, you start sounding like a real country boy. It feels put on, I think, for a lot of modern country music, and it wasn't always that way. And this vocalist just really embodies that classic country sound. I've never heard anything like this, honestly. I don't even know where to begin. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the song, this feels like an electronic group that wanted to utilize some country guitar work in their music for atmosphere. Because really, we get a little bit of that harmonica, we get the chord progression on the acoustic guitar, but that's really it. But then the vocalist comes in, and I'm sold. That is country vocals. That would not fit in any other genre very well. Is this a country group utilizing electronic music? I'm not sold on that either. I'm really confused how all of this works. Was this a guest vocalist? Something along those lines, because I can't see how this project can be extrapolated to be anything other than exactly what this song is. It's kind of bonkers because it does everything that it does exceptionally well. The electronic side is fantastic. The country side is very believable. Not just somebody doing country sounds, but legit making a country song. And again, an older country song, which is wild again because this came out in the mid 2000s and yet they are perfectly emulating a sound 40 to 50 years prior. Of a genre that was not very popular at the time. Not even just the 50s country, but country was kind of losing its appeal to pop culture in the 2000s. So like, this is just a very specific sound on a very specific project, and it just kind of blows my mind. I don't I don't know how else to interpret this opening half, though. It's a collection of sounds that don't feel like they fit together, are very rarely utilized together, aside from, the past, 5 years when we started smashing everything together. Electronic and country have been oil and water for such a long time. This is quite ahead of the curve, predicting what we would see 15, 20 years later. I don't know how to interpret it. It's a collection of bonkers sounds that is blowing my mind, honestly. Then we get to the back half, though, and we bring in some of the background vocals that we had in the first half. We bring in what was that? I don't remember what instrument that. Oh, was it the little toy piano organ sound thing? And it came in with the same melody it had played in the first section. I was like, okay, are we going to pair these together? Are we going to build it up in a different way? What's the connective tissue reutilizing this motif? I don't think that question ever got answered. The song went in a very different direction, and once we started adding layer upon layer upon layers, getting all of this rhythmic and harmonic information present, I kind of forgot about the idea of looking for similarities between the halves because there was so much to dig into here. The first half of the song is layered textually. There are a lot of sounds appearing, but they're not consistent. It's the flurry of vocal deliveries that we have with that digitized speak and spell kind of vocal that we consistently hear at different pitches with different textures and tones and modulations to it, offsetting the acoustic human-made vocals and the call and response that they have. That's really where all of the momentum and layering comes from in that part. But this second part, it's all about actual layers, not call and response, not taking turns, but start with a foundation. Add an idea, add two ideas, add three ideas, add another couple of ideas, and just how dense can we make it? There is so much depth to it. The first half of the song pulls us along on a linear journey, well, on a horizontal journey. As we move from the beginning to the middle of the song, the back and forth between these two vocals is what carries and pushes the song, but this is a vertical journey. As the layers continue to get stacked on each other, there's more depth to dive into. The question is no longer where are we going, but what are we going to hear next? What are they adding to this soup to spice it up? And it's a very different approach, utilizing very different sounds. If the first part was country electronic, this is 40s or 50s pop electronic. Again, as I've mentioned many times, my music history outside of classical and jazz is pretty rough, but especially as we get prior to the 70s, even the 60s, I only have a vague grasp on, but before that, I'm just kind of lost entirely. Um, it's funny, when I was back in university, all I cared about was writing music. So I took as many composition courses as I could and kind of skated by on the humanities stuff. But now, I kind of wish I had taken more history courses. I took history of jazz, that was important to me. We did some classical history, that was pretty much required, but I probably had an opportunity to take like U.S. popular music history, and I just never did, and that would have been like really cool. But anyways, so we have this style here, and it's perfectly represented, much like the countryside was very well represented too. The production here fits. It's a bit clearer than I think any recordings of the time would be today, but it captures the same vibe and essence. The composition is absolutely there with many of the romantic stylings. classical stylings in the music, all the string movements here, the chordal progressions underneath the vocals. It just absolutely nails the vibe of the era. The vocals fit as well, and it's just a very uplifting, whimsical almost piece that I think, again, there's a part of me, like I mentioned at the end of the reaction, that I would not be surprised at all. I wouldn't even question the fact if someone mentioned, oh yeah, they just found an old sample, spruced it up a little bit, and tossed a bunch of electronic stuff on top of it. I'd be like, yeah, that checks out, because it's just that authentic of a sound. Much like the countryside, this group knows what they're doing, and that really impresses me. Because this group isn't just electronically focused, which tends to be a bit more of texture and creation. There certainly is electronic music that is compositionally impressive, but the thing about electronic music is that it isn't bound to the same restrictions as music that must be played by hand. It's not bound to the sounds of instruments that we physically have. It's limitless, and so it tends to explore those limits outside of traditional composition. And also, as you move closer to the mainstream side, it tends to be more loop-based and can get very dance-based, as electronic music is also the preferred music for like clubs and stuff. So, I'm not trying to box in electronic music by any means, but to find something that is as compositionally structured and well written, while also carrying the themes and ideas of two older styles and mixing them with modern ideas in ways that not only really represent those sounds well, but mixes them with the modern sounds in ways that are congruent and benefit the song overall, is super impressive to me. Again, I don't know if I'm talking down to electronic music or anything, but I just don't expect this type of writing or cohesion from an electronic group. Again, not to say they don't exist, it's just not the status quo. It's not my expectations based on my experience with the genre. And so that just, it really does blow my mind. And I think the most impressive thing is the layering. Sure, once we get into the swing of things and bring back that classic sound, that's really cool too, but the buildup is equally impressive to me. We start off with a couple of simple rhythms, some harmony. We bring in a triplet rhythm off to the right, if I remember correctly. That gives us a little bit of uh, polyrhythm going on. And then we really begin to focus on ornamental ideas, little flits and flutters here and there, 2 or 3 notes on an instrument, 2 notes over there, and we start creating a little bit of a hocket based on all of these ornamental ideas bouncing around consistently. And it isn't long until we've introduced a melodic idea based on dotted quarter notes. Now we have a third rhythmic concept, and many of those fluttering ideas are also syncopated, where the length of the notes in the little pocket of sounds is different. Many of the instruments are rather consistent. Like I said, the triplet idea over here, every note is a triplet eighth note. Or the quarter note concept on the little toy piano, every note is a quarter note. But the little fluttering ornamental ideas have varying lengths to their notes. It creates a rhythmic juxtaposition against the rigidity that's experienced everywhere else. But the rigidity is important because it allows us to layer these consistent rhythms on top of each other to create the polyrhythms, which allow the syncopated rhythms to shine. It is just so well orchestrated from the ground up. And beyond that, we begin to explore harmonic elements. The chord progression starts out rather simple and becomes more complex and deep with every additional layer. As we begin to add more melodic ideas, we have more and more notes being played all at the same time, creating these denser, thicker chords, giving us this complex emotional information. It's just really impressive listening to the ways that the song gets layered here. Yeah, we have a lot of timbres too. We have textures and it builds the atmosphere. That's all present as well, but Also, the other building blocks of music, rhythm and harmony, are also getting explored in interesting ways that continue to expand and grow and change with each passing passage. It's, I don't know, I'm kind of blown away by it. Do I know what any of this means? No. Usually around this time in the analysis, I would give my interpretation of the musical story, and then we check out some lyrics and see how any of that might pair together, something like that. If it's a sad song musically, maybe we'll find some sad lyrics and be like, oh yeah, that worked perfectly. Usually, I hope with more fanfare than that. It was sad, and the lyrics are sad. I did such a good job interpreting this. No. But here, honestly, I don't have a grasp on this at all. I find it very difficult to figure out what this song is trying to say in any way. I'm not going to say that it lacks depth or substance, but on a first time listen, being relatively a novice for this type of sound and collection of sounds, I think more importantly, to me it feels style over substance. And I think that's honestly what I've spoken about most too. So I kind of knew this before I knew it and stated it. To me, this is all very cool because of what it's mashing together. But I don't get any substance out of it on a first time listen, and I'm not putting that at the feet of the song. As of right now, as I said, with my inexperience with this kind of stuff, I'm putting that on me. I think that's a skill issue right there. But I mean, it's quite possible. Maybe somebody very familiar with this group chimes in and like, no, they're a very style over substance group. They like to do cool things on the surface, but that's usually as far as it goes. I don't think I'd feel vindicated if I read that, but it would kind of ease my necessity for understanding depth and would make me not want to dive into a second or third listen for the primary element of understanding it. I would love to listen to this again casually though. There's a lot of really cool things in here that I would not mind hearing again. Let me find some lyrics on this, check that out, and then we'll move into part 2. All right. This is interesting because it kind of does feel countryist. At least the language utilized feels southern. It says it's not always easy to know when to stop because the biggest pig of all is love. It took me a second to figure out what was going on here, but I think the concept of being a pig, at least in the South here, is something insatiable. A voracious element that just can't ever be satisfied, and it's the idea of not knowing when to stop. And then well, a term that I've heard, I don't really hear too often, I heard it a lot growing up though, is pigging out. Especially referring to eating is just continuously eating. Um, and so the idea here, I think, is it's not always easy to know when to stop loving someone. It's written in a very odd way that I don't even know if I'm right about, but that's my interpretation of that line. The second verse says, absence makes the heart grow stronger. At least that's what they say, but how could I miss you if you won't go away? What I find interesting is that we have the rhyme here of say and away, where we didn't have that with stop and love. Usually, when we explore lyrics, a lyricist will either choose to rhyme or choose not to rhyme. It is possible for them to choose one style and occasionally utilize another in their song, especially with maybe an accidental rhyme, or maybe they rhymed everything. They just couldn't really make this line work, so they didn't rhyme it. But we only have these two lines here. There's nothing else to base anything on. We have two verses that are two lines each. That's it. There's a little bit more, but I mean that's the meat of the song right there. Anyways, this I think is right on the surface level. They say that you should, if you love something, let it go. It makes the heart stronger, but you never leave. I don't know what this is supposed to imply, though. Does it mean that he wants this other person to go so that their love can grow, or that they're kind of tired of them being around and just want them to go? Both of these verses are finished with the two lines of "Be my bad dog if you want, be my true hog if you want," and I have no idea how to interpret those. They just feel like random southernisms that someone might say randomly, which I'll tell you happens a lot down here. It really does. You just start talking and you'll come up with something that makes no sense, but like the person you're listening to gets the gist of it. And then maybe it's a phrase that some people like and you just keep repeating it, and honestly, it's more of a gut feeling of a phrase than a strong metaphor. And that feels like one of those. Be my true hog if you want. That doesn't really mean anything to me, but I kind of get a vibe of it. The idea of being my bad dog or my true hog kind of feels like be the thing that gets on my nerves, or be the thing that I'm going to chase after. I don't really have a good way of conveying why I get those feelings out of those sentences. They just feel like southernisms to me, and that's the gut feeling I get from them. The idea is that he feels like he wants to love this person, but they make it difficult at times. Really, he thinks maybe some space between them would help, but it's up to the other person. Do they want to make this work, or don't they? Do they want to put in some effort, or do they want to call it quits? However, my understanding of this song ends there, because we have one more stanza and it runs very opposite of the vibe I got from those opening two verses. It says, "Please help me now, 'cause I'm falling down. You left here without me, now I'm falling down. Save me from myself, 'cause I'm falling down." This whole concept is that this person is failing now, and they want this other person maybe as an emotional support being in their life, maybe for actual physical help, maybe for monetary help, anything. They want this person's help and they're not here anymore. I'm sorry, dude. 40 seconds ago, you said that they need to leave so that absence can make the heart stronger. Like I said, it's this massive reversal here of, oh, you've left? Well, now I really need you. I don't know, man. I don't know how to interpret that. Unless, I don't remember there being a gap in the music, though. The lyrics kind of came back to back, and then we hit the midpoint, and we had our instrumental outro. And what does that have to do with any of this? Again, the music just doesn't really make any sense to me. It's cool. It is surface level cool. The combination of things they got going on, the way that everything ends up working, their ability to recreate old sounds, very good stuff. What do these sounds have to do with the lyrics, though? I don't know. I'm curious where this goes, though. I think this is the only set. Oh, no, because the Sunset Rubdown tracks didn't go into each other, but they were on separate albums. I think other than that, though, every single pair of songs this week has smoothly transitioned into each other, and that's not going to happen today, I don't think. There's still a couple seconds left on part one, but we're in silence. Even if the silence smoothly goes into the next, that's not a smooth transition, I don't think. Let's dive into part two and see what is going on with this next exploration of the fire engine on. I'm trying to make sense of that too. Oh, what? Oh, I totally forgot that the second half of the last song I had mentioned felt like longing and very dreamlike. The sense of longing does work with those lyrics. Yeah, I love those syncopated, smaller snare hits against the accent ones. The theremin is wild. It works well with the organ, but with what's happening in the center, it's so... I don't know. Really harsh break into the organ. That's the second time that's happened too. Some sort of white noise crackling over here. Tape crackle. See, this almost sounds like a mix of loss and positivity. There's occasions where the organ kind of gives me a vibe of like the death of something, but generally the song feels like finding motivation to take that next step. I think a lot of that comes from the vocals, which have a bit of a positive spin to it, like neutral positive, and then the energy of the drums, the general groove there. The song feels like it wants to drag back, but the drums drag it forward. Yeah, see, this is very somber. The crackle of the tape doesn't help either. The theremin is just such a wild choice for this though. Especially the very shaky style, the heavy vibrato that they're utilizing on it. Also, they're not using exact like pitch movements. Everything is slurred into the next with these very fluid movements. Such a stark difference to the percussive rhythmicness of the drums, even of that guitar right there. There's a staccato element to it. It's very precise about its pitch, and the theremin's just very loose about it. The arpeggiation in the middle is an interesting choice. It speaks to me about movements, again, much like the drums. But I felt the drums already had that locked in. Oh, I was like, there's still a minute to go. So we brought back that toy organ sound and the whistling, but I don't think we brought back any of the music of part one, but we do have some timbres. Well, that was certainly more focused than part one. A singular vision, at least for the like 5.5 minutes. We do have those stark contrasts. It started off with something very different than the core sound. We run into that organ. We just immediately cut all sound entirely. It's very harsh cut off. The organs come in. We have that tape crackle over on the left. And then we move into the meat of the song. Listen to that for a little bit, and a harsh cut into the organ again. The organ feels very melancholic to me. It's very somber. It is the one part of the song that makes me feel like we're witnessing the death of something. Being that we just got done listening to a song about a relationship, it could be the end of the relationship, but I don't know. We've had so many jumps, timbre, compositionally, harmonically in this song from part one. It's really difficult for me to expect any sort of thematic or lyrical tie over either when there's so much musical difference between them. But yeah, the death of something. I think it's a very somber moment, but it's always, we get pulled out of it by the drums. And the drums bring so much energy to the song. It's very upbeat. Everything else is these long held out notes. The song just wants to drag their feet. They don't mind walking forward. They don't want to get anywhere too fast. It's low energy. And the drums come in with snare accents on 2 and 4, pretty standard, but a lot of cool syncopated ideas with these lighter snare hits around that. Some eighth note ideas on the cymbals. There's just a lot of progression forward. It's rhythmically energetic. It always seems to drag us out of that organ focused section into something that feels a bit more upbeat. Not necessarily bright and positive and joyous, but a little more upbeat than the dreariness that the organ likes to reside in. And then from there we have the vocals that come in, and a couple other elements, the bass that we have in the middle, some stuff that helps elevate it just a little bit, give it some extra energy, and the organ chord progression changes to introduce a brightness to it. The organ, when played with the group, is a different chord progression than the organ played solo. One is more somber, one has a tinge of optimism to it. I think it is a song about trying to learn how to get back on your feet after something catastrophic happens. Whether that catastrophic is uh, definitively a large idea or if it's just relatively a large idea. The end of a relationship isn't really something I think most people would call catastrophic unless it was your relationship in the way that it destroys your life, and maybe there's just a lot of emotion you had tied to that relationship, a lot of yourself in your world, and it feels catastrophic relatively. And so it really does feel like trying to get yourself back up off the ground after you've been knocked down pretty hard. That's generally what the back and forth of this song means to me. It's less exploratory, though, and I think that's why it's easier for me to get a grasp of what's going on. There's only a couple of instruments, and we don't really have genre mashing. Where's the country? Where's the old school pop? Where's even any of the wild electronic sounds? Where's the pitch shifted vocals? This song is played a lot straighter, with its emotions clearly on its sleeve, than the last song, which tried to disguise so many ideas beneath musical mixed metaphor. The last song was cohesive in its vision, but compared to a lot of music, it's very eclectic and all over the place, exploring so many wild mashups. This song's very straightforward. It knows what it wants to do and it does it. Aside from those harsh transitions, the song's very palatable, very understandable. And I find it interesting that we have this clash, this contrast between part one and part two here in this style, the musical style, the instruments being used, the way that it's composed. We don't even have the stop in the middle of this track. Part one has a very clear midpoint where the first half is very different from the second half. And we do kind of experience that here. We have a bit of silence around the 5.5 minute mark before going into the outro. And the outro is very different from everything else, but it's also a bunch of acoustic instruments, some of them reprising their roles from part one. It is a way, I think, to tie it back, at least sonically. But again, it doesn't go back to any of the general sound, the eclectic mashups, the any of the ingenuity of part one. It's a surface level retread of some sonic ideas. And that in and of itself is not a negative. I think it's actually a really cool thing. Primarily because thematically it's the concept of simplification. It's not like simplification in composition is hit and miss. It really depends on context. Um, but here, I think that the compositional side doesn't even matter. I don't care what it's doing that's simplified. I really care about what it represents. What was once chaotic and eclectic and wildly mashed together is now a bit more structured. It's simplified. There's less sound, there's less noise, there's less clash. It could be an element of finding finding a type of peace with oneself and growing into who you are kind of idea. I don't know. We'll have to hit the lyrics and see if anything. Oh, speaking of the lyrics too, I just realized I don't think part one had any of the pitch shifted vocals in that lyric list. It seemed, I mean, it was a short amount of lyrics, but I mean, there's that back and forth between the main vocalist and the digitized ones. I don't think the digitized ones showed up in the lyrics I found. I might have to look that up later. Did this have lyrics? I remember a vocalist, but it's such a short amount, I think. I mostly remember the balance between all the instruments. Speaking of, let's get back on track here. I think the last thing I want to touch on is the theremin. I mentioned that every other instrument is rhythmically purposed. The drums have their syncopation, and it's kind of difficult to hold out a note on a drum. I mean, the cymbals kind of give that with the way that they ring out, but drums, percussion in general, is you hit it, you get your attack, and that's your sound. But even the guitar that we have is focused on these shorter, tighter notes. We do have the long held out notes of the chord progression, but when the chord changes, we have a very distinct shift from this chord to that chord. There isn't a lot of reverb that would carry over and allow the notes to overlap in any way. The vocals, very rigid in their delivery as well. A smoothness to the vocals themselves, but again, you don't really hear too much of overlapping pitches. And when one pitch changes to the next, you have a very sharp shift. You don't slur it and hit all the microtones between the two pitches. But that's exactly what we get with the theremin. It stands out massively against every other instrument because everything it does is hyper legato slurred. We are constantly hearing the microtones between the pitches. When we move from one note to the next, we get every sound between them. It is possible to play staccato on a theremin. It is a lot easier to just move your hand in smooth ways and get this hyper legato slurring sound, but it is possible to get sharper, notes, very short ones. So it has to be an intentional decision then. But why? When the whole song is built around this one style, this stands out in a way that I don't think supports the song. Maybe we get to the lyrics and it is about this oil and water idea of two sides that don't mix. We have kind of alluded to that in the previous lyrics, so it wouldn't be that far of a stretch to continue that here. But the theremin also does something else that feels a bit wild, and it's the super heavy vibrato. Constant. All you have to do is hold your hand in place to hold the note out, and it's just this constant movement. And that's kind of wild. Doing that right there, it's really difficult to move one set of muscles very sharply and strictly like this, and then create a fluidity with the rest of your because even that is like, it's these very sharp movements between pitches. If I was, hypothetically playing a theremin here, air theremin, like air guitar. But also you play the theremin by moving your hand in air too. So that's interesting. Anyways, I find it really difficult to have those really sharp movements for the vibrato, but then to loosen the rest of my arm up to achieve the fluidity that they get when changing notes. So that's actually kind of impressive. Something I didn't know about until just now trying to recreate it. I kind of want to buy a theremin now. Uh, Anyways, though, yeah, it's just like the rhythm, the way it's performed. It's the only instrument with vibrato, and it's such a sharp, obvious one. It just immediately pulls your ear towards it, because it's really tight and it's really quick. And I don't know, everything about the theremin screams I don't belong here, but production wise, I think it does. It kind of blends in with everything else. It's just done in such a bizarre way that contrasts the writing style of every other instrument that makes it feel out of place almost at every time. How does everyone else feel about that? Was your ear constantly drawn to it, or did it actually blend into the song? 'Cause it totally did not blend in for me. And it kind of distracted me through a lot of the track, unfortunately. I was going to bring up the ending, but I've kind of touched on that already. It's a nice reprise of the earlier sounds with a little bit of new writing and helps tie everything together. But the simplicity also means something, because we're hearing the sounds that were chaotic and we're finding a calmness with them now, which I think works well narratively. But let's see how any of this pairs back to the lyrics. All right, this kind of feels like it's in that same direction of the true hog, bad dog kind of thing that I was talking about with the last set of lyrics. Just a series of words that feel like some sort of Southern Americanism that doesn't really mean much, but you get a gist for. Except instead of applying it to just one line, it's this entire song. There's only two stanzas to this track, about 8 lines each. There's a lot of inconsistencies if I look at everything directly. And I think this is really best to be understood emotionally with a little bit of distance between you and the words, kind of taking everything, looking for the depth and trying to avoid the surface level. But it does talk about being opposed to someone and deciding to walk beside them and exploring those two separations. The first one says, I have the plan of a clockwork man. He was happy to walk where I always ran. When I'm orchestrated, automated, decimated, regulated from Three Folks Creek from underground by a despot man and a clown. Again, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, but this idea that this clockwork man was happy to walk while I always ran, this schism between the two people's approach. I don't know if I'm supposed to pair this back to part one, but that was also about a schism between people. Verse 2, though, says, if you choose to walk in step with a clockwork man, a map of warm roads in his concrete hand, does he miss the reeling? Does he miss the falling? Can he take you where the boom bands play when you're underground? Can he read the sounds and chase the hack and cracks away? I don't know what a hack and crack is, but I immediately think it's some sort of monster, some sort of creature, something to be scared of. Oh! Oh. Is this about jealousy? Part 1 said, I don't know when to stop loving you. In a way, it was the end of a relationship where neither party were really aware that it was over yet, but it certainly was, and we're just waiting for them to realize it to end it on their terms. Eventually, the one walks away, and the other wants them to come back, discovering that they were actually their rock. This appears to be the thoughts of the person left behind watching the other person in a new relationship. It says that this new man, he's like clockwork. He walks everywhere. I used to run though. Didn't you like that? He says you can choose to walk in step with him and you might find some cool, warm roads. But can he take you where the boom bands played? Can he read the sounds when you're underground and chase your fears away? Is he going to be as good of a lover as I was? That's kind of the vibe I get here. Interesting. And again, I have no way of pairing this back to the music other than, well, actually, no, I do, because I just need to take a second sometimes. I mentioned that the music kind of felt like getting yourself back up after a big loss. This kind of feels like that. They've begun to get their life back together only to find the person they used to be in a relationship with in another one. It brings some of that pain and hurt back up. It's a remembrance of the death of that relationship. The jealousy I don't really hear in the music too much, but the pain, the sorrow, the elegy turned into an adjective. Is that elegiac? Anyways, the somber elements in the music. I can see that here. This is definitely a song about being in pain here, but that pain is jealousy, and the jealousy comes from hurt, sure. But man, just like that last song, it's like I can make this one thread, but I can't tie it all together. I just have like this one piece that connects it. I don't know. It feels like this duology of tracks is open for a lot of interpretation, and so I leave this video here. These are my thoughts on Flotation Toy Warnings, Fire Engine on Fire, parts 1 and 2, but what are your thoughts? opinions and perspectives on this track. Is there anything you'd like to add on to what I stated, correct me on, or do you have something in a totally different direction that you picked up on? Put all that stuff down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link for Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though. We're going to check out a special selection and some brand new music. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.